During the Neolithic period, the megalith builders were at their most prolific in Europe. They had the skills to quarry huge stones to transport them sometimes over long distances and to use them for the construction of enormous megalithic structures. But quite strangely, not all areas of Europe were characterized by this megalithic activity. If the megalith builders were one community, then they were distributed over a broad area and interspersed with other Neolithic societies that were quite happy not to bother with megalithic construction at all. Of course, it's also possible that the megalith builders in different regions were not part of the same culture, but adopted each other's ideas. Or, alternatively, there may have been no relationship or communication between them. They may each have developed a penchant for giant stone monuments independently. A few weeks ago, I visited the Museum of Prehistory in Valencia, which documents the region's extensive past and includes many exhibits from the Cardial ware culture that inhabited the Mediterranean coast of the Iberian Peninsula during the Neolithic. It made me wonder why the Cardial ware culture didn't build megaliths, whereas the contemporary inhabitants of Iberia along the Atlantic coast did. In this video, I discuss what we know about ancient Iberia and the various cultures that lived there during the Neolithic to see if we can go some way towards answering this question. The area which now makes up the Spanish territory known as the Valencian community has evidence of human habitation going back 350,000 years. It's full of rock shelters and caves which became home to Neanderthals around 50,000 years ago, before anatomically modern humans moved into the area and also made use of these natural grottos. Numerous flint tools, bone artifacts and shell jewellery have been found at such Palaeolithic sites. They are also the locations of impressive rock art which proliferated at that time, something that Eastern Iberia has in common with other parts of Europe during the Paleolithic. These examples of rock art are from the cave called La Cova del Parpalo, south of Valencia. Human habitation continued throughout the Mesolithic with similar but more refined tools and jewellery appearing in caves and rock shelters. These prehistoric people sustained themselves through hunting and fishing. Around 5,500 years ago, agriculture appeared for the first time in the Valencia region with the arrival of the Cardial ware culture. Archaeologists gave them this name because of their distinctive pottery style with incised decorations created using the heart-shaped shell from the Cardiidae family. The earliest sites belonging to this culture have been found in the eastern Mediterranean, from where it spread westwards, eventually reaching the Iberian Peninsula in the middle of the 6th millennium BCE and bringing farming with it. During the Neolithic, rock art continued to be a feature of the Mediterranean coast. The series of rock shelters known collectively as Pla de Petrocos are a UNESCO World Heritage Site with painted motifs dating to between 8,000 and 3,000 years ago. Neolithic rock art has been divided into three categories by experts. Macroschematic art mostly includes geometric, anthropomorphic, and serpentine motifs. Some of the anthropomorphic figurines are referred to as people praying, but it's difficult to know much about the beliefs and related practices of Neolithic communities. Just because they look like they are praying to us based on our modern hand gestures, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they represent. Since the macroschematic rock art motifs are similar to those found incised in Cardial ware pottery, they can be dated to the 5th millennium BCE. Levantine art also dates to the same time period, and it's made up of men, women, and animals in hunting scenes. Schematic art is the name given to motifs that started in the Neolithic but peaked around the Copper Age. It comprises stick figurines of humans and animals, as well as geometric patterns and images referred to as idols. Both archaeological evidence and genetic studies have proven that agriculture first arrived in Europe with people from the Near East who settled in the Balkan Peninsula before spreading west and northwards through two separate routes. The Cardial ware culture diffused through the central and western Mediterranean, whilst the Linda Band Keramique culture moved northwards along the Danube River. This DNA study from 2015, published in the journal Molecular Biology and Evolution, helped elucidate the migrations of the Cardial ware culture during the Neolithic. Practically the whole of Neolithic Europe was characterized by cave dwellings, open-air villages, rudimentary pottery, agriculture, and animal husbandry. However, in some places, huge megalithic structures were also erected, the complexity of which seems disproportionate to the skills, resources, and priorities of these early farmers. Megaliths dominated the Atlantic facade from western Iberia to the British Isles, and whilst many of these structures had a clear funerary role, many others had functions which have been lost to us. One of the most famous monuments which is thought to have played a role in astronomical observations is the cromlech of Almendras in Evora, Portugal. The Carnac alignments, also on the Atlantic coast but in France, may have had a similar purpose. More than 3,000 standing stones make up what's become known as the Carnac alignments, although there are also singular menhirs and sizable decorated passage tombs in the area that must have been connected to this extraordinary site in some way. Many dolmens still remain along the Atlantic facade. In fact, Galicia in northwestern Iberia has thousands of them. Although it's clear that dolmens were built for burials, it's not certain why the ancients went to such a tremendous effort to construct them. The Antequera dolmens in Andalusia stand out for their large size and intricate internal construction. Presumably, the belief system of the megalith builders was intimately connected with their mighty construction projects. The monuments may have played a practical role in their lives, but there were also likely rituals and ceremonies that took place around them, especially at those used for burials. It's also worth mentioning that earlier this year, another incredibly extensive megalithic site was discovered in Huelva in Spain. I featured it in one of my weekly news videos. With more than 500 standing stones and other megalithic features, it must have been a really important site to the Neolithic inhabitants of Iberia. The prehistory museum that I visited in Valencia was separated into time periods. So I started off in the Palaeolithic and moved chronologically through time. It struck me how this progression through the different phases of prehistory did reflect an evolution in the quality of jewellery, tools, and eventually pottery. The Mediterranean coast of Iberia fits nicely into the image we have of a region which developed over time as new skills were acquired and outsiders moved into the area, bringing their own expertise with them. However, on the Atlantic facade, this neat pattern is disrupted by the megalith builders, whose sophistication for construction was quite out of sync with other aspects of their lifestyle. I personally think there's something we're missing here. Remember, in every other way, the megalith builders were like other Neolithic farming communities. They lived in mud brick huts, they grew crops, and they made basic pottery. So what made them develop this little sideline in stone construction? As you know, I don't think it was aliens. The whole lost civilization idea is interesting though, but there's quite a disconnect between the time a cataclysm most likely took place and when megalith building became popular. Why would the survivors and their descendants wait thousands of years before they started their construction projects, unless the timeline for the megalithic structures is completely wrong? That's quite possible because stone monuments can't really be dated. However, those that contain burials have been dated by the remains. Of course, there's also the intriguing possibility that they were not for burials originally, but were reused at a later date. I quite like the idea of that actually. My research will continue. So I thought it might be helpful to discuss the best resources in Valencia for understanding the history of the region, especially prehistory, which is my favourite subject, clearly. But also the Roman period remains there are quite interesting for my research, and I'll explain why in a moment. Most of what you see in Valencia these days dates to the medieval period onwards. This arch is one of the few structures dating back as far as Arabic times, which followed the short occupation of the Visigoths after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. However, the buildings which have the most impact on the landscape today date back to the 12th and 13th centuries, when it was known as the Kingdom of Valencia and was part of the Crown of Aragon. There are some gorgeous towers, gateways, and churches from that time period, many of which can be visited. The Museum of Prehistory is the best resource for understanding human habitation in the region, right from the Paleolithic through to the pre-Roman period, when the Iberian script first appeared and when the groups known as the Contestanti, Editani, Ilocavones and Bastetani inhabited the area. It's a large museum with lots of exhibits, however nothing is in English. The plaques are in Spanish and Catalan, so you need to use a translator app if you don't read those languages very well. I got there as soon as it opened, and it was just me and the security guard wandering from hall to hall in silence, which was pretty awkward. There were also a few Roman exhibits, such as a large mosaic, but the majority of the Roman finds are at the Almoina Archaeological Museum. For a long time, it was known that Valencia had been founded as a Roman city in 138 BCE. However, very little had been found until some construction work revealed a large part of the old city underneath the modern one. These Roman remains were left in situ and turned into an archaeological museum. Interestingly, these finds helped experts map how the old city had been laid out, and it's now known that the large square next to the cathedral called the Plaza La Virgen is where the original Roman Forum used to be. Roman period Iberia really interests me because Tarragona has huge cyclopean walls, just like those on mainland Italy, and they are said to be Roman. As you know from my previous videos, there's a lot of debate as to whether such cyclopean walls were really Roman or not. I figured that if Tarragona has this polygonal masonry, then it should also have been a feature of other Roman towns and cities on the Mediterranean coast of Iberia. So, whilst in Valencia, I visited the Almoina Archaeological Museum to take a look at the Roman remains there. And I didn't find any megalithic polygonal masonry. The section of wall in the center of this photograph and the part it adjoins to are known as adobe walls. These are the oldest Roman walls that have been found in Valencia and are made of sun-dried, molded earth. They date to 138 BCE when the city was established by the Romans during the Republican era. So I'm going to explore other Roman remains in Spain, including the Cyclopean walls in Tarragona, to see if I can figure out this little mystery. This is one of my favourite subjects to research. Maybe Cyclopean walls were Roman, but from a different time within the Roman period. However, as I've explained before, the location pattern of the Cyclopean walls only matches the settlements of the Roman Republic era. It's also possible that they simply haven't survived in Valencia. Maybe Cyclopean masonry was only used for the wall that surrounded the Roman city. From what I've read, nothing of that wall has ever been found. It was robbed out a long time ago. If you're interested in dinosaurs and geology, the Natural History Museum is also fantastic. Lots of rocks, just not the megalithic kind. This isn't a travel channel, so I won't talk about the botanical gardens or the fine art gallery and other fun things I visited there. But I do want to highlight anything that's history related because it's interesting to see how settlements have changed and wavered in importance over time, and also how natural features such as geology and water resources helped to shape settlements. For example, it seems that in Roman times, Valencia was an island on a wide river, which was important for defense. I also like to learn whether ancient people made tools from locally available materials or if they imported them. In Malta, the temple people imported obsidian from other islands in the Mediterranean and yet had a culture that was completely unique. They interacted, but they remained isolated at the same time, and I find this really fascinating. It tells us a lot about prehistoric cultures. In understanding the ancient past, we have to take an interdisciplinary approach, weaving together lots of different subjects. Another site worth mentioning is the Visigothic crypt. Although the Visigoths only had Valencia for a couple of hundred years between the end of the Western Roman Empire and the Caliphate of Cordoba, they did build a large cathedral, a small section of which survives underground near the Almoina Museum, along with a Visigothic funerary chapel and some tombs. I was the only person down there as well. It was brilliant and just a tiny bit eerie. This central part of Valencia has been resettled and rebuilt continuously since the Roman period. There's so much history packed into a small area. It's quite common to find sacred buildings constructed over the top of earlier ones as well. In the area I'm talking about, the Roman Nymphaeum, Visigothic Cathedral and Medieval Cathedral are all very close to one another. The problem with researching the Neolithic period is that we don't have texts from that time, but we also don't have much in the way of robust buildings. Before urbanization became popular, people lived in caves or mud brick huts, sometimes with stone foundations. And that's what I like about the Neolithic megalith builders. They may not have planned and built cities, but they did leave something incredibly robust behind. Maybe that was the whole point. Perhaps they were leaving them as a message for future generations. What we're looking at might be a language written in stone. We just haven't learned how to decipher it yet. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit the like button and click on that notification bell so you know when I publish a new episode. I'll see you next time.